My husband woke up early and packed his gray suitcase in the dark, convinced he was just leaving for a standard business trip. 30 minutes after the front door clicked shut, a photograph arrived on my phone that buried our marriage forever. Today, sitting across from him in this sterile mediation room, I brought more than just that picture. I brought a trap built over months of silence, and he has no idea he is about to lose everything. My name is Lauren Hayes, and I am 32 years old. I sat on the left side of the long mahogany table in a sterile mediation room in Brighton Falls, Colorado. The air conditioner hummed with a low, monotonous drone that seemed designed to drain the fight out of anyone sitting here. Across from me sat my husband, Ethan Hayes, and his attorney, Mr. Garrison. The only sound louder than the ventilation was the rhythmic, sharp click of Ethan's expensive pen. Click, click, click. He was treating the end of our marriage like a minor contract dispute, just another item on his to-do list before lunch. Mr. Garrison adjusted his silk tie. He looked the part of a man who won cases by exhausting the opposition with paperwork. He looked at me with a practiced, professional pity that made my stomach turn. "Ms. Hayes," Garrison said, his voice smooth and condescending. "We need to look at the facts. You have no significant assets. You have generated no income for the household since the birth of your daughter. The offer on the table is generous considering your lack of contribution. It provides a small transition fund and visitation rights with Maddie every other weekend." Ethan did not even look up from the notepad he was doodling on. He checked his watch, a heavy platinum piece I had bought him for his promotion last year. "Lauren, let's be realistic," Ethan said, letting out a short, impatient breath. "I have a board meeting at Northbridge Capital in 45 minutes. I cannot be late because you are feeling emotional. Just sign the papers. You know I am the only one bringing money home. I am the only one keeping a roof over Maddie's head." I kept my face completely still. I did not cry. I did not scream. I felt a cold, sharp clarity that I had not felt in years. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin manila folder. I placed it on the table between us. I did not open it immediately. I wanted his arrogance to fill the room first. I wanted him to feel entirely safe. "Is this your financial disclosure?" Garrison asked, reaching for the folder with a smirk. "I assume it is empty." "Not exactly," I said softly. I opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the smooth wood. It was not a bank statement. It was a high-resolution photograph printed on A4 paper. The image was crisp. It showed the parking lot of the Airport Grand Hotel. In the center of the frame was Ethan, wearing the navy suit he was wearing right now. He was holding the handle of his gray suitcase with one hand. His other hand was tangled in the hair of a young woman with blonde hair. He was kissing her. It was not a peck on the cheek. It was the kind of kiss that made the rest of the world disappear. The clicking of the pen stopped instantly. "Mrs. Lawson, the mediator," a woman in her 50s with eyes that had seen every version of marital collapse, leaned forward. She adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Lawson said, her voice dropping an octave. "I suggest you and your counsel take a moment to look at this." Ethan stared at the photo. His face went pale, draining of color until he looked like a wax statue. "This photo came to me exactly 30 minutes after you left the house," I said. My voice did not shake. 30 minutes after you told me you were going on a solo business trip." Ethan let out a nervous, breathless laugh. He looked at Garrison, then back at me. This is a misunderstanding," Ethan stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the image. "It's not what it looks like. Lauren, you are being paranoid." I looked him dead in the eyes. He actually thought he could talk his way out of this. He thought this meeting was a negotiation. He was wrong. Today was not the beginning of the story. Today was just the execution. To understand the weight of that gray suitcase and the woman in the picture, we have to go back. We have to go back to the morning the shutter clicked. I listened to the silence in the room, watching the sweat begin to form on Ethan's forehead. I told myself the truth as I sat there. The morning he quietly packed his suitcase, I was still a wife. Half an hour later, I became the quietest, most dangerous enemy of his life. The sound of a heavy zipper tearing through the silence of the bedroom was what woke me. It was the specific, friction-filled hiss of metal teeth locking together. I blinked into the darkness, my eyes adjusting to the faint gray light filtering through the blinds. Ethan was standing by the foot of the bed, illuminated only by the street lamp outside. He was shoving folded shirts into his gray suitcase with a frantic, jerky energy that felt less like packing and more like purging. I sat up, pulling the duvet to my chest, confused by the sudden activity. "Ethan," I asked, my voice thick with sleep. "What are you doing?" He did not turn around. He just grabbed his laptop charger and threw it into the side pocket of the bag. "Go back to sleep." "Lauren," he said, his voice tight and low. "Something came up with the portfolio in Seattle. I have to catch the first flight out. I didn't want to wake you." "Seattle." I rubbed my eyes. "You didn't mention anything about Seattle last night at dinner. Is everything okay?" "It's fine." "It's just work," he snapped, finally glancing at me. In the shadows, his face looked hard, devoid of the usual morning warmth. He walked over to the dresser, but instead of his usual wallet, he picked up a slim, black card holder I had never seen before. "Just don't make a scene." "Okay, it is only 3 days. I need to focus. And I really don't have time for 20 questions." I watched him move. There was something off about his rhythm. He was wearing a shirt I had not bought for him, a stiff, dark blue button-down that fit him a little too perfectly. Then I saw him reach into the back of his sock drawer, the spot where he kept his passport and birth certificate. He pulled out a small metallic box he always claimed contained boring company tax documents. He slipped it between the layers of clothes in the suitcase. "You are taking the tax box?" I asked, fully awake now. "Compliance audit," he muttered. He zipped the bag shut and stood it upright. He looked toward the door of Maddie's room down the hall, then checked his watch. He did not go in to kiss her goodbye. He did not even walk over to my side of the bed to touch my shoulder. "I will call you when I land," he said. He walked out of the bedroom, his shoes silent on the carpet. I heard the front door open and close downstairs. It was a soft click, barely audible, but it left a hollow, vibrating space in the air of our house in Lakewood Ridge. 30 minutes later, the house was bright with morning sun, but the cold feeling in my chest had not left. I was in the kitchen, cracking eggs into a bowl and waiting for the coffee machine to hiss to life. The routine felt fragile. My phone buzzed on the granite countertop. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up. It was a text message from a number I did not recognize. There was no greeting, just an image and a single line of text. I tapped the screen. The photo expanded. It was high definition, clearly taken with a professional zoom lens. The background was the valet drop-off of the Airport Grand Hotel, not the departure terminal. Ethan was there, gripping the handle of that same gray suitcase. But he was not looking for a cab. He was wrapped around a woman with long blonde hair. Her hands were on his neck. His face was buried in hers. My breath hitched in my throat. I read the text beneath the image. Not a business trip. Don't let him lie anymore. There was no signature. My blood ran cold, and I felt a violent thumping in my temples. This was not just a tip-off. This was a targeted strike. "Mommy." A small voice drifted from the hallway. I jumped, shoving the phone into the pocket of my robe. Maddie was standing there, rubbing her eyes, her stuffed rabbit dragging on the floor. "Mommy, I am hungry," she mumbled. I forced a smile onto my face, though I felt like I was going to throw up. I walked over and scooped her up, burying my nose in her hair to hide the tremor in my breath. "I know, baby. I am making eggs right now," I said. my voice sounding frighteningly normal. Daddy had to go on a trip, so it is just us girls today. I told myself in that moment that Maddie would never see me break. She was the one thing in this house that was true, and I would not let his lies touch her. The drive to the preschool felt surreal. I kept checking the rearview mirror, scanning the cars behind me. A black sedan turned left when I turned left. Was I being followed? Was the person who sent the photo watching me right now to see my reaction? My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My old instincts were waking up. I did not call Ethan. I did not text him a furious string of question marks. Instead, while sitting in the preschool parking lot after dropping Maddie off, I saved the photo to a hidden folder on my phone. I logged into my iCloud and changed the password. Then I enabled two-factor authentication on my email. It was muscle memory from a life I thought I had left behind. When I got back to the empty house, the silence was deafening. I went upstairs and pulled my old laptop from under the bed. It was a heavy machine, running an operating system I had tweaked myself years ago. I opened it up, the fan whirring loudly in the quiet room. I stared at the screen. The photo was not just proof of infidelity. The timing, the angle, the anonymous number. It was a warning. Someone was telling me that the ground beneath my feet was gone. I opened a new document. I did not name it divorce or cheating. I typed in a file name that felt appropriate for the cold, hard reality setting in. Suitcase morning audit. If this is the start of how you want to leave me. Ethan, I whispered to the empty room, my fingers hovering over the keys. Then I will be the one who writes the ending. To understand why I did not scream when I saw the photo, you have to go back to a dinner party 3 months ago. It was the 30th wedding anniversary of Ethan's parents, the Porters. Their house was a sprawling, cold mansion in the hills that felt less like a home and more like a showroom for expensive furniture that nobody was allowed to sit on. Diane, my mother-in-law, opened the door. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my first car. She gave me a hug that felt like she was trying to avoid wrinkling her silk by touching me. Lauren, she said, pulling back to inspect me, you look rested. I suppose you are still at home watching the girl. She let the pause hang there, heavy and judging, before turning her beaming smile toward Ethan. Happy anniversary. Diane, I said, my voice lost in the foyer as they ushered Ethan inside like a returning war hero. Dinner was an exercise in humiliation. The conversation at the long glass table revolved exclusively around money. Ethan held court, talking loudly about his new acquisitions at Northbridge Capital, the new Tesla he was ordering, and the vacation property in Aspen they were thinking about buying. I sat quietly, cutting Maddie's chicken into tiny, safe squares, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. Shelby, Ethan's younger sister, sat across from me. She worked in public relations and had the kind of shiny, aggressive hair that looked like a weapon. She took a sip of her wine and smirked at my outfit. That is such a cute dress. Lauren, Shelby said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. It is so brave of you to stick to department store brands. I honestly admire it. I wish I had the time to hunt for sales and watch Netflix all day, but my firm is just killing me with overtime. I tightened my grip on my fork. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to say that raising a toddler was not exactly a vacation. But Ethan spoke first. Oh, don't let her fool you, Ethan said, grinning at the table. Lauren is very busy. She is the CEO of Hayes Home Incorporated. Her primary duties include snack distribution and nap supervision. The whole table erupted in laughter. Ethan looked at me, his eyes shining with pride, waiting for me to laugh at myself. I sat frozen, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Even Maddie looked up from her coloring book, sensing the change in the air. A drunk cousin at the end of the table slammed his hand down. Well, you have got it made. Ethan, if you ever get divorced, it will be a clean break. She has got nothing to claim. Right, I am the primary risk taker, Ethan said, raising his glass in a toast to himself. That is how the world works. Shelby leaned forward, looking at Maddie with a pitying expression. "Well, at least Maddie is cute," Shelby said. "She takes after Lauren, which is lucky. She won't have that Porter pressure to succeed. She can just be normal." The insult was precise. She was calling my daughter mediocre because she came from me. I looked at Ethan, pleading silently for him to say something. To be a father, to be a husband. Ethan just shook his head at me and whispered, "Don't be like that. You are being too sensitive." That was the moment the switch flipped. I looked at him and realized he did not just allow his family to abuse me. He enjoyed it. Standing next to my failure made him feel taller. Maddie rubbed her eyes and whimpered. I stood up abruptly, the chair legs scraping loud and harsh against the marble floor. "We are leaving," I said. "Sit down." "Lauren," Ethan snapped, his smile vanishing. "We haven't had dessert. Maddie is tired. I am taking her home. I drove," Ethan hissed, grabbing my wrist under the table. "If you leave now, you are walking." I pulled my wrist free. I reached into my purse and pulled out the spare key fob I always kept. "I know the way," I said quietly. I picked up Maddie, who curled instantly into my neck, and walked out of the dining room without looking back. On the drive home in the dark, with Maddie asleep in the car seat behind me, I did not cry. I did not feel sad. I felt a strange, robotic detachment. It reminded me of my old life, sitting in a server room, scrolling through lines of error logs to find the source of a system failure. I realized then that my marriage had been hacked a long time ago. I had just been too busy being a wife to check the security protocols. "If you think I am nothing," I whispered to the empty road, "then you won't see me coming." To Shelby and the Porters, I was just Lauren, the woman who clipped coupons and wiped apple juice off the counter. They had no idea that before I traded my blazer for a diaper bag, I was a senior risk analyst at CipherNest Analytics. My job was not watching Netflix. My job was hunting down data breaches for Fortune 500 companies and figuring out exactly who had left the digital backdoor open. I left the corporate world when I was pregnant with Maddie because Ethan insisted his salary was enough for both of us. He wanted a wife who was always available, not one who was on call for a server crash at 2 a.m. But I never completely severed the cord. I kept a single limited liability company active, a quiet entity named Hayes Digital Forensics. I told Ethan it was just a hobby to keep my resume fresh, a way to make a few $100s here and there. He laughed it off and never asked about it again. He should have asked. That night, after the humiliation at the dinner party, I did not go to sleep. I went to the basement and powered up my encrypted laptop. I logged into the dashboard for Hayes Digital Forensics. I had set up automated maintenance contracts years ago with a few loyal clients, small firms that needed monthly security patches. I had not checked the balance in 6 months, when the number loaded on the screen. I blinked. The account held nearly $45,000. It was not a fortune, but it was war chest. I also had the legacy my father left me. My dad was a first-generation software engineer, a man who did not trust banks but trusted infrastructure. When he died 2 years ago, he did not leave me a lump sum of cash that Ethan could claim was marital property. He left me a trust filled with boring, slow-growth stocks and data centers and fiber optic companies. The trust was legally structured to be impenetrable, completely separate from my marriage. "Okay, Dad," I whispered to the screen. "Let's see what you taught me." I cracked my knuckles and opened a terminal window. It was time to audit my husband. I downloaded the transaction logs from our joint bank account for the last 24 months. Then, I accessed Ethan's primary email. He thought he was clever because he changed his password to the name of his favorite scotch. But he had never changed the recovery answers I helped him set up 5 years ago. Once I was inside, I exported his payroll notifications. I wrote a quick script in Python to compare his deposits against his spending. I was looking for a pattern, a heartbeat in the data that did not belong. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the hemorrhage. Ethan was meticulous about keeping our joint account at a steady, consistent level so I would never suspect we were short on cash. But according to his payroll stubs, his base salary had increased by 18% last year. That extra money never hit our shared bank. Where did it go? I traced the routing numbers. The missing funds were being siphoned automatically into an account held by an entity called Redbrook Ventures. Redbrook Ventures. I said the name aloud, testing the weight of it. Who are you? I switched to my OSINT Tools open source intelligence. I ran a search on the business registry. Redbrook Ventures was an LLC formed 14 months ago. The registered address was not an office tower. It was a co-working space downtown that accepted mail for virtual tenants. The registered agent was a lawyer named Marcus Dean, a man whose name I recognized from industry chatter. He was the guy you hired when you wanted to hide assets from the IRS or an angry spouse. I opened a spreadsheet and began to type. I logged every date. I logged every dollar amount. I logged every transfer. The shame of the dinner party evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard focus of an investigator. I was no longer the wife who got laughed at for cutting chicken. I was a hunter tracking a target. The picture was becoming clear. The photo of the blonde woman at the airport and these hidden transfers were not separate incidents. They were two sides of the same coin. Ethan was not just having an affair. He was building an exit strategy. He was siphoning off our wealth, dollar by dollar, into a life raft that only had room for one person. I looked at the total amount diverted to Redbrook over the last year. It was enough to put a down payment on a house. It was enough to start a new life. I created a new encrypted volume on my hard drive. I dragged the spreadsheet, the bank logs, and the screenshot of the Redbrook corporate registration into the folder. I sat back in my chair, the hum of the computer fan the only sound in the basement. My heart was no longer racing. My hands were steady. I realized that if I confronted him now, he would just lie. He would hide the money better. He would delete the emails. No, I thought, staring at his name on the screen. I am not going to ask you for the truth. I am going to steal it. I closed the laptop. From this moment on, I would not say a word about my feelings. I would be the perfect, clueless wife he thought I was. I would let him think he was winning, right up until the moment I burned his entire world to the ground. I did not go to a therapist to cry about my broken heart. I went to the law offices of Marisol Vega in Brighton Falls. The rumor was that Marisol did not take clients who wanted to weep into a tissue. She only took clients who wanted to win. Her office was glass and steel, smelling of expensive espresso and intimidation. I sat across from her, laying out the photograph, the humiliating details of the anniversary dinner, and the spreadsheet of suspicious transfers I had compiled. Marisol listened without interrupting. She took notes with a fountain pen that looked sharp enough to draw blood. When I finished, she capped the pen and leaned forward. "Lauren, I need you to answer this honestly," Marisol said, her voice devoid of softness. "Do you want him to hurt, or do you want you and your daughter to be safe and rich?" I did not hesitate. The old Lauren, the one who just wanted her family to be happy, was gone. Both, I said. But if I have to choose, I choose safety for Maddie and the truth exposed. I don't need to slash his tires. I need him to lose the things he thinks are his weapons. Marisol smiled. It was a terrifyingly efficient smile. She pressed a button on her intercom. A moment later, a man walked in. He wore a rumpled cardigan and thick glasses, looking more like a high school geography teacher than a weapon of mass destruction. "This is Owen Clark," Marisol said. "He is our forensic accountant. He used to find internal embezzlement for hedge funds before he decided he preferred destroying arrogant husbands." Owen sat down and looked at my spreadsheet. His eyes scanned the numbers like a machine reading a barcode. "Nice work on the Python script," Owen said, not looking up. "You missed a nested shell company in the Cayman transaction, but this is a solid start. We spent the next hour building a 3-tier battle plan. Phase 1 was the silent accumulation of evidence regarding Ethan's dissipation of assets. Phase 2 was building a firewall around my own assets, specifically the LLC and the trust my father left me. Phase 3 was the nuclear option preparing for the inevitable moment Ethan tried to use Maddie as a bargaining chip. Here is the hardest part. Lauren, Marisol said, pointing a manicured finger at me. When you go home, you have to be the actress of your life. You have to be the dependent, clueless wife he thinks you are. If he asks about money, look confused. If he mentions work, look bored. The stupider he thinks you are, the more careless he will be. I can do that. I said. Good, Owen interjected. He turned his laptop screen toward us. Because I just traced the outflows from Redbrook Ventures, the money isn't just sitting there. It is being paid out as consulting fees to a freelancer listed as H. Lane. I felt a cold spike in my chest. Harper Lane, I said. She is the new operations assistant at Northbridge Capital. I met her at the Christmas party. She told me she loved my shoes. Well, Owen said dryly, it seems she loves your husband's money more. Those consulting fees match the dates of his business trips almost perfectly. A few nights later, I was back in Marisol's office. The mood had shifted from clinical to urgent. Marisol tossed a file onto the desk. Lauren, this is bigger than an affair, she said. I have been looking at the debt structure and these transfers. Ethan isn't just preparing to leave you. He is cashing out. He is leveraging his equity to the hilt and moving liquidity offshore. He is planning to run before his fund gets audited. I sat back, the realization hitting me. The divorce was just the smoke. The fire was financial fraud. To increase our leverage, I decided to pull a thread from my past life. I opened a secure channel to an old friend from CipherNest who was now working for a federal agency that handled cybercrimes. I did not give them Ethan's name. I simply sent an anonymous summary of the transaction patterns, flagging the irregularities in the fund's management. It was enough to raise a red flag, enough to start a quiet inquiry. Just a little nudge, I whispered as I hit send. I left Marisol's office and walked out into the cool night air of the city. I looked up at the skyline, at the lights of the office towers where men like Ethan thought they were gods. For the first time in months, I did not feel like I was crawling out of a deep hole. I felt like I was standing on a command deck. I was coordinating a war that would not fire a single bullet, but would dismantle a man's name letter by letter. It was a Thursday morning, and the house smelled of oatmeal and Vicks VapoRub. Maddie was home with a low-grade fever, curled up on the living room rug watching cartoons, while I wiped a cool cloth across her forehead. The peace was shattered by a sharp, authoritative knock on the front door. I opened it to find a stranger holding a thick manila envelope. He did not smile. He simply asked for my name, thrust the packet into my hands, and walked away. I stood in the foyer and tore open the seal. It was a petition for divorce filed by Ethan. I scanned the legal jargon, my eyes catching phrases that made my blood boil. Ethan was requesting exclusive use of the marital residence. He was claiming that I had no independent income and was unable to provide a stable financial environment. But the line that made my hands shake was at the bottom. He was petitioning for primary custody, with me receiving only restricted visitation on alternate weekends. I turned on my heel to call Marisol, but when I looked at my phone, the Wi-Fi icon was gone. I walked over to the thermostat to turn up the heat because the house felt suddenly freezing, but the digital display was dark. I checked the smart home app. Access denied. Password changed. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Ethan. I have secured the home network to prevent you from doing anything impulsive with our assets. Don't do anything stupid. Lauren, I will be home tonight to talk. Cooperate, or the judge will see exactly who is unstable here. He had cut me off. He had locked me inside a cold house with a sick child and cut the digital lines. I looked into the living room. Maddie was laughing at a blue dog on the television. She had no idea her father had just declared war on her mother. I took a deep breath, forced my shoulders down, and sat next to her for a moment. Mommy has to do some work for 5 minutes, Okay, I whispered, smoothing her hair. Then we can have ice cream. I ran upstairs and pulled my secret laptop from its hiding spot. Unlike the family iPad, this machine had its own dedicated 4G modem. I powered it up, bypassing Ethan's childish blockade instantly. I scanned the divorce papers and emailed them to Marisol and Owen. He locked the house systems. I typed, "He is trying to squeeze me." Ethan came home at 6 o'clock. He looked calm, almost bored. He glanced at Maddie sleeping on the sofa, then motioned for me to sit at the kitchen table. He placed a single sheet of paper in front of me. "This is a voluntary separation agreement," Ethan said, uncapping his pen. "I am being generous. Lauren, I am offering you a lump sum of $15,000. You will vacate the house in 30 days. You waive all rights to future alimony." I looked at the paper. $15,000. He spent more than that on his golf club membership. "And Maddie," I asked, keeping my voice small, "if you sign this tonight, without dragging lawyers into it, I will grant you 50-50 custody," he said, leaning back. "If you don't sign, I will have my lawyer submit the file we have been building, the one about your postpartum issues, the crying, the stress, how you are unfit." He was gaslighting me. He was threatening to use my exhaustion as a new mother against me to take my child. I picked up the paper, letting my hand tremble visible. "But Ethan," I said, looking up at him with wide, fearful eyes, "do we need a financial disclosure, like a list of assets I thought that was required?" Ethan laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "Lauren, be serious," he sneered. "What is there to disclose? You have nothing, I earn the money, I own the house. You just need to sign." He had just admitted out loud that he refused to disclose his assets. Marisol would love that. I need to sleep on it," I stammered. "Please, just one night." Ethan sighed, grabbing the paper back. "Fine, one night, but tomorrow morning, the offer drops to 10,000. He went upstairs to bed, confident he had crushed me. I stayed downstairs, checking on Maddie. I pulled out my secure phone and sent a message to Marisol. He wants me to believe I am helpless. He just threatened me with a custody battle to hide his financials. Good. Let him think I am scared for one more week. I watched the text send, the blue bar moving across the screen. Ethan had locked the thermostat, but he had no idea he was the one standing in a burning house. The next morning, Owen dropped a bomb on my desk in Marisol's office. It was not a physical explosive, but it did just as much damage. "Your husband is broke," Owen said, tossing a thick report onto the glass table. "Actually, he is worse than broke. He is drowning." I picked up the report. The numbers were staggering. Ethan had maxed out every credit card he had, but that was just the surface. According to Owen's deep dive, Ethan had leveraged his equity shares in Northbridge Capital to secure a personal loan of $250,000. He had dumped every cent of it into a speculative cryptocurrency fund that had collapsed 3 weeks ago. He lost it all, I asked. Staring at the red ink, "Nearly 90%. Owen replied. And to cover the margin calls, he started getting creative. That is where Redbrook Ventures comes in. He is using those fake consulting contracts to move client money into high-risk accounts to try and win back his losses before the quarterly audit. It is a Ponzi scheme of one." My stomach churned. This was not just bad math. This was prison time. But the real shock was waiting for me in my own basement. That night, while Ethan was out networking, which I now knew meant panic meeting with his lawyer or his mistress, I went through the boxes of documents my father had left me. I was looking for anything that might help shield my trust from Ethan's impending legal disaster. I found a dusty folder labeled Ridgeview Holdings LLC. I knew my father had diversified the trust into real estate, but I had never paid attention to the specifics. I opened the portfolio and scanned the list of assets. It was mostly boring commercial warehouses and strip malls. But then, my finger stopped on the third entry. Property 1200 Summit Plaza. Class A office space. Brighton Falls. I froze. I knew that address. I drove to that address every year for the Northbridge Capitol holiday party. It was the gleaming steel tower where Ethan worked. I frantically flipped to the lease agreements. There it was, in black and white. Northbridge Capitol paid a monthly lease for floors 18 through 20. The landlord listed on the contract was Ridgeview Holdings, LLC. The beneficiary of Ridgeview Holdings was the Lauren Hayes Revocable Trust. I sat on the cold concrete floor of the basement and started to laugh. It was a dark, jagged sound that scraped my throat. For 5 years, Ethan had come home bragging about his building. He bragged about his corner office view. He bragged about his reserved parking spot. And for 5 years, every single month, his company had been writing a check that ultimately ended up in my pocket. He was a tenant. I was the landlord, and he did not have a clue. You don't own the view. Ethan, I whispered into the darkness, wiping a tear of hysteria from my cheek. You just rent it from me. My phone buzzed. It was my contact from Cyphernest. The message was short and terrifying. Heads up. The SEC just flagged a series of insider trades at Northbridge. They are tracing the IP addresses. One of the login attempts came from a residential IP in Lakewood Ridge. It looks like he used your old email address to register the burner account. The laughter died in my throat. Ethan was not just hiding money. He was setting up a fall guy. He had used my name and my home network to create a paper trail. If the feds came knocking, he was planning to point the finger at the bored housewife with a computer science background. The rage that had been burning inside me turned into ice. I was done feeling sad. I was done feeling betrayed. This was no longer a divorce. It was a hostile takeover. I spent the next 2 nights working with Marisol and Owen to compile a new dossier. We called it the Real Ethan Hayes file. It contained everything: the debt, the crypto losses, the fraudulent Redbrook transfers, the SEC flags, and, as the cherry on top, the lease agreement proving I owned the floor he stood on. We printed it all out and placed it inside a plain manila folder. It looked innocent. It looked like nothing. But as I held it in my hands, I knew the truth. It was the heavy artillery. He thinks he is walking into a negotiation to crush a weak woman, I told Marisol as I placed the folder in my bag. He has no idea he is about to hand his resignation to his boss. The week leading up to the mediation felt less like waiting for a legal appointment and more like watching a wire being pulled tighter and tighter until it had to snap. Ethan decided to host a small gathering of his colleagues at the house on Tuesday night. It was a power move. He wanted to show them that his domestic life was under control, that he was the unbothered captain of the ship. I let him do it. I stayed in the kitchen, wiping down the counters and arranging appetizers like the invisible staff member he treated me as. Through the open doorway, I heard the clink of ice against crystal and the boom of Ethan's laugh. "Oh, the divorce will be very clean," I heard him say to a junior partner. "Lauren is, well, she is not exactly sophisticated when it comes to finance. She has nothing to leverage. It is just a matter of signing the checks." I did not drop the tray of bruschetta. I placed it gently on the island, walked into the pantry, and smiled. Later that night, I checked social media. Shelby had posted a story on Instagram. It was a photo of her holding a martini glass against a blurred city background. The caption read, "Filtering out the drama from the family. Feeling lighter already. Fresh start." I did not get angry. I took a screenshot, cropped it, and saved it to the folder named Psychological Warfare. Wednesday brought a different kind of assault. Ethan's mother, Diane, invited me for coffee. She chose a cafe that charged $8 for a latte and smelled like judgment. She started by asking about Maddie, but her eyes were cold. "Lauren, dear," she said, touching my hand with her manicured fingers, "I think you should consider signing Ethan's proposal quickly, for the sake of the family name. If this goes to court, People will start looking into, well, your lack of contribution. It could be very embarrassing for you to have a judge analyze why you sit at home all day. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I did not defend myself. I did not mention my bank accounts or the building her son worked in. Actually, Diane, I said, my voice terribly flat. I wanted to ask if you knew whether the bakery uses cashew milk. Maddie has developed a sensitivity to cashews. Not peanuts, just cashews. It is very specific. The doctor said we have to read every label. I spent 40 minutes at the grocery store yesterday just reading cereal boxes. Diane stared at me, her mouth slightly open. She tried to pivot back to the divorce 3 times, and 3 times I bored her to death with details about toddler allergies and fabric softeners. She left after 20 minutes, frustrated and convinced I was exactly the simpleton Ethan said I was. By Thursday, the trap was set. Marisol sent a formal email to Mr. Garrison. It was not a generic request. It was a surgical strike. The subject line was Discovery Request regarding non-marital assets. The body of the email requested 3 specific things: all invoices regarding consulting fees paid to Redbrook Ventures, the loan agreement used to collateralize Northbridge Capital Class B shares, and a list of all real estate holdings where Ethan Hayes is a beneficial owner. Ethan called me 11 minutes after the email was sent. "What the hell are you doing?" he screamed into the phone. "Who gave you those names? You are playing dirty. Lauren. And if you keep digging, I will make sure you never see Maddie without a supervisor present. Do you hear me? I will destroy your character. I will paint you as totally incompetent." I held the phone away from my ear, watching the recording app spin. "I am just following my lawyer's instructions. Ethan," I said, keeping my voice steady and confused. "I don't really understand the terms. Is something wrong?" He hung up. The silence that followed was sweet. On Friday, a gift dropped into my lap. My phone buzzed with a message from a number I did not have saved, but recognized immediately. It was Harper Lane. She must have clicked on my name in an old group chat for the company Christmas party instead of sending a direct message. "He says it will all be over by next week. We can finally go public." "Are you doing okay? I hate hiding this." I stared at the screen. She thought she was texting a friend. I did not reply. I forwarded the message directly to Marisol and Owen. Then came the final piece of the puzzle. My contact at CipherNest sent a secure ping. The Securities and Exchange Commission had officially opened a precedent survey into the trading patterns at Northbridge. They did not have a target name yet, but they were circling. Ethan was running out of time, and he didn't even know the clock had started. I spent the weekend in a state of aggressive normalcy. I took Maddie to the park. I went to yoga. I bought groceries. But at night, while the house slept, I sat with my encrypted laptop and edited my financial disclosure. I checked every decimal point. I verified every date. The night before the mediation, my phone lit up one last time. Tomorrow at 9 in the morning. Don't waste my time. I need this done so I can prepare for the board meeting. Just be a good girl and sign. I looked at the text. Then I looked at the plain manila folder sitting on the kitchen counter. It looked so thin, so unassuming. "You will be done, Ethan," I whispered to the empty kitchen. "But not the way you think." The air in the mediation room was stale, recycled, and thick with Ethan's arrogance. We were back in the present moment. Mr. Garrison, having adjusted his cufflinks for the 3rd time, leaned back in his chair with the satisfied sigh of a man who believed he had just crushed a bug. "As you can see, Ms. Hayes," Garrison said, tapping the document in front of him, "this offer is extremely generous. You can walk away with $15,000 and a clean slate. Or you can go to court, where we will unfortunately have to dismantle your character and question your ability to parent. It is your choice. 2 paths. Only one ends with you having any dignity left." Ethan nodded, not even looking at me. He was checking his phone under the table. "Just take it, Lauren," Ethan muttered. I have a board meeting. Mrs. Lawson, the mediator, cleared her throat. The sound was sharp, cutting through the smug atmosphere like a scalpel. Before any signatures are placed on any documents, Mrs. Lawson said, her voice devoid of warmth, procedure dictates that I read the summary of financial disclosures from both parties into the record. Garrison waved his hand dismissively. We can waive the reading of Ms. Hayes's disclosure. We are all aware of her financial standing. It is a waste of billable hours. I will not be waiving anything. Mrs. Lawson said. She did not look up. She opened Ethan's file first. I will begin with Mr. Hayes. Ethan shifted in his chair, looking annoyed but not worried. Ethan Hayes. Assets include primary salary and bonuses from Northbridge Capital. Mrs. Lawson read. The numbers were high, impressive to anyone who did not know better. But then her tone dropped. Liabilities. Multiple credit cards near maximum limits. A personal loan of $250,000 secured against Class B equity shares in Northbridge Capital. Current status of collateral at risk. Ethan stopped checking his phone. Additionally, Mrs. Lawson continued, squinting at the page. There are recurring monthly outflows totaling $5,000 listed as consulting fees to an entity named Redbrook Ventures. There appear to be no corresponding invoices or contracts attached to these payments. Those are standard operating expenses. Garrison interjected quickly. Corporate strategy. Mrs. Lawson peered over her glasses. Mr. Hayes, if you default on the loan provisions due to the current devaluation of your equity, you risk losing 40% of your stake in the firm. This is not just a debt, it is a landslide waiting to happen. Ethan's face went rigid. The muscle in his jaw jumped. He looked at Garrison, but the lawyer was suddenly very interested in his own notepad. Now, Mrs. Lawson said, moving Ethan's file to the side. She reached for the thin manila folder I had placed on the table earlier, the one Garrison had laughed at. She opened it. She paused. For 3 seconds. The only sound in the room was the hum of the ventilation system. Mrs. Lawson blinked, leaned in closer, and then looked up at me with a completely different expression. Disclosure for Lauren Hayes. She read. Income sources include retained earnings from Hayes Digital Forensics LLC, current cash on hand in separate accounts, $45,000, beneficiary of the Hayes Family Trust, currently valued at approximately $1.8 million in diversified securities. Ethan's head snapped up. What? Mrs. Lawson ignored him. Real estate assets. Ms. Hayes is the sole beneficial owner of Ridgeview Holdings, LLC. She paused again, as if making sure she was reading the line correctly. The primary asset of Ridgeview Holdings is the commercial property located at 1200 Summit Plaza, Brighton Falls. Ethan stood up. His chair scraped violently against the floor. That is impossible, he shouted, his voice cracking. That is my office building. I did not look at him. I looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand swept past the 12. Sit down, Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Lawson commanded. She turned back to the paper. According to the lease agreements filed here, Northbridge Capital pays a monthly rent of $28,000 for floors 18 through 20. That rent is paid to Ridgeview Holdings, which means, Mr. Hayes, that for the last 5 years, your company has been paying rent to a legal entity owned effectively by your wife. Garrison's face drained of color. He frantically began flipping through his own copies of the paperwork, his fingers fumbling. He knew exactly what this meant. He had built his entire strategy on the premise that I was a destitute dependent. Now, I was the landlord. She never told me, Ethan stammered, looking from me to the mediator. This is fraud. She hid this. I didn't hide anything, I said, speaking for the first time. It is in the trust. You just never asked. Marisol leaned forward then. The shark had smelled blood. And regarding your poverty plea, Mr. Hayes, Marisol said, sliding a new document across the table. It was the flowchart Owen had created. Here is the trace on your Redbrook Ventures payments. They go directly to a personal account held by a Ms. Harper Lane. Marisol dropped the photo of the airport kiss on top of the flowchart. It landed face up, Ethan staring at the camera, Harper kissing him, the gray suitcase standing next to them like a tombstone. The payments to Ms. Lane coincide exactly with your business trips, Marisol said coldly. We are prepared to argue that this constitutes dissipation of marital assets for the purpose of an extramarital affair. If we go to court, we will be asking for every single dollar back. Ethan slumped into his chair. He looked small. The expensive suit suddenly looked like a costume that didn't fit him. Mrs. Lawson closed the folders. She clasped her hands together and looked at the two men across the table. Summary, she said, her voice ringing with finality. Verified net worth of Lauren Hayes approximately $3.2 million, excluding projected commercial rental income. Verified net worth of Ethan Hayes negative. Once we factor in the crypto losses, the loan against equity, and the potential liability to investors, the room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. All I could hear was the ticking of the clock, marking the seconds of a life that Ethan Hayes used to own, slipping away one by one. Ethan stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped over. His face was a blotchy, furious red. You deceived me for years, Ethan shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. You let me pay for everything while you sat on a pile of cash. You pretended to be helpless while you were robbing me blind. I looked at him calmly, my hands folded on the table. I didn't let you pay for everything, I said, my voice cutting through his noise. You paid rent. To me. You paid for the privilege of pretending you were a big shot in a building owned by your wife. Marisol did not let him catch his breath. She flipped a page in her binder. We are invoking the dissipation of marital assets clause, Marisol said, her tone clinical. Every dollar you spent on hotels, dinners, and those phantom consulting fees for Ms. Lane will be deducted from your share of the remaining assets, which, by my calculation, is already significantly below zero. This is insane, Ethan yelled, looking at his lawyer. Do something, Recess, Mr. Garrison barked. He grabbed Ethan by the arm and practically dragged him into the hallway. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I watched them. Ethan was pacing back and forth, frantically typing on his phone. He was likely trying to warn Harper, or perhaps he was trying to delete files that were already backed up on a secure server in Washington. It did not matter. The avalanche had already started, and no amount of texting could stop gravity. 10 minutes later, they returned. Garrison looked deflated, like a balloon that had lost its air. Ethan looked sick. My client is prepared to accept a revised agreement, Garrison said, his voice barely audible. It was not a negotiation. It was a surrender. Marisol read the terms we had prepared. I kept the house in Lakewood Ridge. I kept sole ownership of Ridgeview Holdings and the trust. Ethan assumed full responsibility for his personal debts, the loan against his shares, and any future liability regarding the SEC inquiry. Then came the custody arrangement. Lauren Hayes retains primary physical custody. Marisol read, Mr. Hayes will have visitation on alternate weekends, contingent upon clean drug screens and proof of financial stability. Ethan slumped forward, putting his head in his hands. He looked broken. Do I still get to be near her? He asked, his voice cracking. She is my daughter. Then you should have thought about her before you mortgaged her future to impress a mistress, I said. Ethan picked up his expensive Mont Blanc pen. The hand that used to sign million-dollar deals with a flourish was trembling so hard the tip of the pen danced on the paper. He signed his name, but it looked like a jagged scar, a distortion of the man he used to be. Just as he finished, Garrison's phone buzzed loudly on the wooden table. He checked the screen, and his eyes went wide. He looked at Ethan with something close to horror. "We need to leave," Garrison whispered urgently. "I just received a notification. The SEC has issued a subpoena for Northbridge Capital regarding the trading accounts you manage." I did not say a word. I just looked down at the pen sitting motionless on the table. The ink was barely dry, and his world was already over. Mrs. Lawson slid the papers toward me. I did not reach for a fancy pen. I pulled a cheap blue ballpoint from my purse, the kind you steal from a bank counter. I signed my name with a steady hand. It felt like signing for a package I had been waiting on for a very long time. I stood up to leave. "Lauren," Ethan called out. I stopped, but I did not turn around at first. I never thought it would end like this. I turned to face him one last time. "The morning you packed that suitcase, you chose your direction," I said quietly. The photo that arrived 30 minutes later just showed me I needed to walk the other way. I walked out of the mediation building and stepped into the bright, blinding noon sun. My phone pinged in my pocket. It was a message from Maddie's teacher. "Maddie is showing the class a picture she drew of her family. It is beautiful." I texted back that I would be there to pick her up right on time. I gripped my car keys, feeling the cold metal bite into my palm. The only suitcase that mattered to me now was Maddie's little purple backpack. Ethan's gray suitcase was exactly where it belonged. It was sitting in a cold room next to a man who had empty pockets, no power, and a lease on a life he never really owned. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below telling me your city or country, and let's chat about what you thought of Lauren's revenge. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people.